The epic journey of Apollo 11 began the following morning, Wednesday, July 16, 1969. The liftoff was at 8:32 a.m. However, NBC News and CBS News began their coverage at 5 o'clock a.m. Very little ABC News coverage of the Apollo 11 flight will be included on this recording. Now at 5 o'clock a.m., the coverage of Apollo 11, Journey to the Moon, begins with NBC News and the Today Show.
WDAF-TV, Channel 4, Kansas City, Missouri.
This is Today at Cape Kennedy, Wednesday, July 16, 1969. The day Apollo 11 takes off to land 2 men on the moon. I'm Hugh. We're starting an hour earlier this morning with pre-launch coverage of man's boldest flight, his boldest adventure. That flight is scheduled to begin just a little more than 3.5 hours from now. We'll be here on Today for the next 2 hours, after which the NBC space team will continue coverage of the liftoff and through the mission. Here at the Cape, we're standing by for an announcement by Jack King, the voice of Apollo, and how things are going up to this point. It does appear that so far everything is quite in order. The countdown has been progressing smoothly. We're nearing the end of the building hole. We'll have that announcement in just a few seconds from Jack King.
This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. T-minus 3 hours, 30 minutes in holding, but we're about to resume our count shortly. We expect to resume the count a little less than 1 minute from this time. We have been in a plane built-in hold of 1 hour and 32 minutes duration, and it appears that all aspects of the mission are ready to resume the Apollo 11 countdown shortly, now about 25 seconds away. The astronaut crew for Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Edwin Aldrin in the suit room at the crew quarters here at the Kennedy Space Center, donning and checking out their pressure suits. At the launch pad, at the 320-foot level, the hatch of the Apollo 11 command module was opened about 10 minutes ago. The backup lunar module pilot, astronaut Fred Hayes, expected to go aboard the spacecraft shortly to make some preliminary checks. We're going to resume our count shortly. Mark, T-minus 3 hours, 30 minutes and counting. We're counting on Apollo 11. All elements go at this time, aiming for a planned liftoff at 9:32 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The astronaut crew expected to depart from their quarters about 24 or 25 minutes from this time to start the 8-mile trip to the launch pad. They'll be boarding the spacecraft starting at about the T-minus 2 hour, 40-minute mark in their count. All is go with Apollo 11 at this time at 3 hours, 29 minutes, 27 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control.
Well, you heard from Jack King, the state of affairs at this moment. If you notice a discrepancy between the digital counter on your screen and what he said, it's now 3 hours, 29 minutes. That's due to a built-in hold just ending at this time, and that will, the digital counter will coincide with the countdown next time you see it. We have, you notice when you see the rocket, which you can see out a window, it's not yet light here at Cape Kennedy, the venting cloud between stage 1 and 2 as they continue with the input of the liquid oxygen and hydrogen. The crew, as you heard Jack King tell you, got up at 4:15 this morning and had breakfast, but they also had a dinner last night, and we thought you might like to see them dining in the MSOB, the Manned Space Operations Building. There were 10 men at that dinner. Here you see, you can recognize some of them there. Aldrin and Armstrong. You see the reason there were 10, the prime crew of Aldrin, Armstrong, and Collins, who's on the other side of the table, you'll see him in a moment. The backup crew, Lovell, Anderson, Hayes, and the support crew, Schweikert, Evans, and Pogue, and then the 10th man is Deke Slayton, and you see in the picture there. Collins is second from the left. You've seen all of the prime crew now. They were eating and apparently enjoying combination salad, boiled sirloin steak, mashed potatoes, buttered asparagus, tomato puree, cottage cheese, a fruit bowl, bread and butter, and a beverage. This was prepared under careful dietary supervision in the kitchen there. There we see Aldrin, right? He's dressed much like as he was in the news conference last time we saw him on television. This is a chef, a man named Louis Hartzell, who's about as traditional as a steak and eggs that the astronauts eat because he's been there 3 years, and in this business, 3 years is traditionless. A lot of care goes into the preparation of food that these men eat, because the way they feel can affect their mission. Although you've seen examples in space of men who didn't feel quite up to snuff and still performed the duties of the mission. I think these men will be comfortable, and they seem to be enjoying the food. Incidentally, John L. Swigert is not to be confused with Rusty Schweikert. There are some similarity of names here. And so they dined last night, and so they are now finishing up breakfast, having awakened at 4:15. Frank Blair is going to bring us news from New York. We'll be coming to you from the Cape and New York. And as I said, NBC covering from here on through the mission of Apollo 11. If we're ready with New York, we'll switch there for Frank Blair in the news.
Thanks, Hugh. Good morning, everyone. At Cape Kennedy, America's Apollo 11 astronauts awoke before dawn this morning, ready to embark on mankind's greatest journey of exploration and realize the ages-old dream of landing men on the moon. The countdown is proceeding smoothly toward the 9:32 a.m. Eastern Time liftoff. Hundreds of millions of people around the world are awaiting televised pictures of the blastoff, the largest audience to watch anything that has ever occurred in history. Right now, we're going to switch to John Dancy at the Manned Space Operations Building, where the astronauts spent the night.
Everything is still going very well in the countdown for Apollo 11. We're waiting now outside the Manned Spacecraft Operations Building here at the Kennedy Space Center for the emergence of the astronauts. They are inside now putting on their space suits, and they will be coming outside here in just about 15 minutes from now. The astronauts were awakened at 4:15 this morning, and after a short medical examination, they walked down the hall and had breakfast. And last night they had breakfast along with the prime crew and along with the secondary backup crew and the astronaut support team. They received a call from President Nixon last night. They talked to the President for about 5 minutes, and he told them, "You carry with you a feeling of goodwill in this greatest adventure that man has ever undertaken." As we say, the astronauts will be coming out this door in just a few minutes to board the van here to my left for the ride of about 12 minutes over to Launch Complex 39A, where they will board their command service module for the flight to the moon. The weather is good. The visibility is 10 to 15 miles. Ceiling is 15,000 feet. The wind is very light from out of the northeast. The VIP list down here at the Cape to watch this launch today includes Vice President Agnew and former President Johnson, who will all be over at a VIP site, sitting on bleachers where they will be able to see the launch. There will also be about 250 congressmen and senators, as well as their dependents, all being flown here at taxpayer expense to watch the launch, now some 3.5 hours away. This is John Dancy, NBC News at the Manned Spacecraft Operations Building.
The date that will live forever will come Sunday when the lunar landing vehicle settles to the moon's surface. Early Monday, astronauts Armstrong and Aldrin will, if all goes well, become the first men to set foot on the lunar surface, and live television pictures of the momentous event will be relayed to the waiting millions on Earth. In Bogota, Colombia, the schools announced they're shutting down on Monday so students can stay up late Sunday night to watch the moon landing, and all soccer games in the country were canceled. Church bells will ring throughout Venezuela and Brazil on Monday as the U.S. astronauts step down on the moon's surface. In communist Yugoslavia, a special hymn commissioned by Belgrade Radio will be used as the theme song during each news report on the Apollo flight. At Worcester, Massachusetts, Mrs. Robert Goddard, the widow of the man who launched the world's first liquid-fueled rocket back in 1926. It went 41 feet and landed in a cabbage patch. Mrs. Goddard said her husband would have been delighted to know what was happening today. She said, "It's been such a long time coming." And around the fringes of Cape Kennedy, where the crowds of thousands were gathered to watch the liftoff, in one hotel lobby there was an enterprising travel agency taking reservations for future vacation trips to the moon. In Washington, President Nixon, in a 5-minute telephone conversation last night, told the astronauts that you carry with you a feeling of goodwill in this greatest adventure man has ever undertaken. I want you to know that my hopes and my prayers and those of all Americans go with you. Mr. Nixon stayed home to watch the blast-off on television, but former President Johnson and leaders of government, diplomacy, and the world of science were on hand to see history in the making.
End of Track 1. Apollo 11, Journey to the Moon. Beginning of Track 2, Apollo 11, Journey to the Moon. Continuation of coverage of the liftoff. Wednesday morning, July 16th, 1969.
Cover, it looks like it's beginning to break up as dawn comes on here at the Cape. I don't think you can see the daylight yet. You see the powerful floodlights that have dramatically lighted the Saturn V throughout the night. The crowds that are coming to this beach are almost unbelievable. 15 miles from the Cape, we came through parked vehicles that the police were having a little trouble keeping clear of the actual roadway. And of course, once in the Cape, only the authorized people involved in the countdown and the launching or the press are on the Cape at this time. There are some VIPs, and as David Brinkley said last night, some MIPs. VIP standing for very important person, MIP standing for, what was it, middling important or something of the kind. Here's the entrance now we see from the MSOB. The astronauts will be coming from this building, suited up, and to the van that will take them then to the tower. Again, ahead of schedule, because the scheduled time for this event was 6:25. Not much has changed in the nature of the vans. Each of these missions has some changes in the nature of the suits, and in some cases in procedures. We're waiting for the astronauts, the prime crew, to come forth. And now we'll hear from Jack King.
Apollo Saturn Launch Control. It's just past 3 hours, 16-minute mark in our countdown, and we are proceeding at this time. Here in the control center, the launch team continuing to monitor the status of the various propellants. Now all aboard the 3 stages, the Saturn V launch vehicle. The Apollo 11 prime crew of astronauts Armstrong, Collins, and Aldrin finishing up their preparations in the suit room on the west side of the crew quarters here at the Kennedy Space Center. If the count continues to go well, it's expected the astronauts will depart from the quarters some 10 minutes or so from this time to start the 8-mile trip to the launch pad, winding up on the 320-foot level at the pad, the location of the hatch for their command module. This is Kennedy Launch Control, T-minus 3 hours, 15 minutes, 3 seconds, and counting.
John Dancy is there at the moment. We may have an announcement momentarily about the emergence of the Apollo 11 crew, suited up now, ready to get to the van. Here they come. Well, that's not them.
The journey to the moon has begun. Neil Armstrong, wearing his helmet, giving thumbs up. Michael Collins behind him. Edwin Aldrin behind that. Very quickly, the astronauts come out, step into the van, and prepare to pull away. Many of the photographers shout, "Good luck." Edwin Aldrin leans back out the back of the van, looks out the window, waves to the photographers and smiles. The astronauts wore their helmets with the visors down, apparently as an added protection against germs, which NASA has been so careful to do to protect them from germs throughout all of this. Aldrin, again, looked out the back of the van. Once again, he waves to the photographers many of them waving back as Aldrin looks out the back of the window. The van pulling away now for the journey, which will take approximately 12 minutes to go from the manned spacecraft operations building over to Complex 39A, where everything is continuing to go smoothly with the countdown.
A little over 3 hours and 2 minutes now. The van is on its way. The astronauts will be in the command module very shortly. We're back at Tom Cornell, and we were looking at some other pictures around the Cape. One of them that we might get to see is an underside of the engines that will boost this thing into Earth orbit. The engines of the Saturn S1C.
As you're aware, you know, we have cameras all over every place that we look at these things with.
We have a break coming up now, but our thanks to Tom Cornell with Boeing for being with us this morning. We have a station break. We'll be back in a few seconds.
Launch vehicle. This is a piece of ground support equipment, actually. It is not on the rocket itself. It's located on the tower of the mobile launcher at the 200-foot level. This valve is leaking. We had a problem.
This is Jack King, launch control.
Previously. We have sent a team of 3 technicians and a safety man to the pad, and these technicians are now tightening bolts around the valve. Once the technicians depart, we will send hydrogen again through this system to assure that the leak has been corrected. The astronauts are now coming up toward the pad itself as the crew of several technicians at the 200-foot level proceed to tighten some bolts around a leaking valve. Once again, this valve is associated with the system that replenishes liquid hydrogen for the 3rd stage of the Saturn V launch vehicle. Because of the extremely low temperatures of the hydrogen, it continues to boil off during these phases of the count, and we continue to replenish the supply down to the final moments of the count to assure that we have 100% aboard. The crew is working on the valve at this time, and the crew went in a short time ago, and they're going to be followed shortly by the astronaut team, which has just arrived at the pad, the transfer van now backing up toward the elevator. In a matter of 5 minutes or so, we'll be ready for the spacecraft commander, Neil Armstrong, to come across the sill at the 320-foot level. That is our status at 2 hours, 43 minutes, 47 seconds, and counting. This is launch control.
Well, that leaking valve apparently didn't occasion any hole, and is being corrected, and nobody's nervous about it. That's for the system that replenishes the liquid hydrogen. The van has arrived at the base of the lot, and we should momentarily see the astronauts egress from it, for a proper term. They're going to get out of it, and then be taken up the interior of that tower to the White Room, from which they'll enter the command module.
The astronauts have just entered the elevator.
You saw the speed
going up to the
not terribly
capsule.
Motor vehicle speed, and you saw how long it started with us when they left the MSOB. You saw the length of time it took to get out there. And still they got out there a lot faster than the rocket itself did, because the top speed of the crawler was 3 miles per hour.
Member of the crew, astronaut Edwin Aldrin, who will be the last one to board the spacecraft, will stand by in the elevator, seated in a chair, while his 2 comrades first board the spacecraft.
Jack King, voice of launch control.
Armstrong, who sits in the left-hand seat, and Collins, who will sit in the right-hand seat during liftoff, are aboard. Then Aldrin will be called, and he will take his seat, the middle seat in the spacecraft. The spacecraft commander, Neil Armstrong, and the command module pilot, Michael Collins, now proceeding across the swing arm into the small white room that attaches at the spacecraft level. In the meantime, about 100 feet below, we have a team of technicians working on a leaking valve, which is a part of the ground support equipment, a part of the system that's used to replenish the fuel supply for the 3rd stage of the Saturn V rocket. He is proceeding to tighten a series of bolts around this valve in the hope that this will correct the leak. Once the technicians do depart, the hydrogen will again be flowed through the system to assure that the leak has been corrected. The spacecraft commander, Neil Armstrong, and CMP, the command module pilot, Mike Collins, now standing by in the White Room. T-minus 2 hours, 38 minutes, 45 seconds and counting. This is launch control.
That was the voice of Jack King, voice of Apollo. What you're seeing is still in the White Room right at the entrance. As he mentioned, Buzz Aldrin will be seated in a chair in the elevator and wait till the other two astronauts are inside the command module. That intrigues me. The reason for the chair must be more than just manners. It's possible that it's tiring to stand for a long time in a full G, suited up that way. They'll, of course, be not only seated, but reclining inside the command module, ready for the Gs that are occasioned by the liftoff, that powerful first stage. And then, of course, from there on, it's weightless or 1/6 gravity for the two who will walk on the moon. Everything's done deliberately. There's no frenzy or haste, as you see there in the White Room. They'll shortly be entering. That's an air conditioning unit, a portable suitcase-like device that's being carried by either Armstrong or Collins.
Armstrong now aboard the Apollo 11 spacecraft at the 320-foot level at the pad. We have it logged having the commander go over the sill into the cabin at 6:54 a.m. Eastern Daylight. Since that time, the commander has now been tied into the system and has checked in over the communication lines. He was wished a good morning by the spacecraft test conductor, Skip Chauvin, and Armstrong in return said it looks like a good morning. In the meantime, 120 feet below him, the technicians continuing to work to tighten bolts around a leaking valve associated with the system that replenishes hydrogen fuel for the third stage. To repeat once again, this is not a problem on the launch vehicle itself, but on the ground support equipment associated with it. T-minus 2 hours, 33 minutes, 45 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control.
Bill Trout, who's with me, this Hugh down here, directed the White Room crew for Apollo 9. And I want to ask you, Bill, what kind of talk usually goes on in these final moments here?
It's usually a fairly serious type thing, although the private jokes go on between people that are communicating with the crew members. It's not a dead serious type thing, but it's business-like.
Some of the crews have been a little more inclined to jollity than others. These men seem a little bit more on the serious side.
They're an all-business crew. They're a quiet crew, but have a good point, the lighter side of it too. But they're basically a quiet, business-like crew.
Is there a noticeable tension? I could understand it. I'd be tense if I were getting in there. But are there things done to break up the tension? What did the White Room crew do to help them?
Well, the White Room crew, Gunnar Wimp in particular, he's been with most of the manned flights that have been flown from Kennedy. He knows the astronauts quite well, and he always has a favorite little joke that he'll play with them, or, for instance, maybe send a souvenir with them at times.
How long will those men be in the White Room before?
These men will leave at T-minus 55 minutes.
That gives them time to get out down the tower and to some...
And they'll come back to the VAB and into a fallback trailer where they'll still be in communication with the test conductors.
So for the last 55, the only ones near there are the crew sitting
themselves.
Now to CBS News and Walter Cronkite.
Ambassador in Washington, Mr. Dobrynin, and there's a feeling that he'd like to be here watching this launch himself. Many ambassadors, scores of them, are here, but the Soviet ambassador is not, and it is thought that that is a sort of a protocol problem with him, that if he came, then the Soviets would feel bound to reciprocate and invite the American ambassador and others to their launch sites in the Soviet Union, and these they have not opened up yet to visitors of whatever nation or whatever rank. The principal difference, perhaps, in our space program the ground level here, 320 feet up the rocket, where the spacecraft hatch is open, as you see in the background. These are technicians helping the astronauts get aboard. So far, we know that Armstrong and Collins are aboard. The Aldrin is the last to enter. He waits actually in the elevator before leaving and coming out to get aboard after the other two are fixed in their couches, ready for launch. I haven't heard the confirmation that Aldrin has gotten aboard yet, but perhaps he already is. The Armstrong got aboard just 2 minutes behind schedule, which will not affect the launch time of 9:32 a.m. These are pretty busy minutes, aren't they, Wally Schirra, as they get ready for flight?
The timing at this point is to close this hatch out and start purging the cabin to clear out the air that, of course, is at this point, to bring it to roughly a 60-40 mixture, meaning 60% oxygen and 40% nitrogen. This takes a little time to do, so once we close the hatch out, things are starting to pick up pretty fast.
For those of you who were born yesterday, or others who perhaps were not with us in an hour, we've been on the air since 6 a.m. Eastern Time here. This chap sitting beside me is Wally Schirra, of course, a veteran Mercury 7 astronaut who has flown every one of our spacecraft, Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, and we're very pleased to have with us during the flight of Apollo 11 as a colleague, sidekick, and expert on space flight. Can't think of any better. I think, Wally, one of the most significant things of this day perhaps has not occurred yet since we haven't had the launch yet of Apollo 11, but in the words of Vice President Agnew arriving down here for the launch of Apollo 11, and he made a statement which sounds as if this administration is committing itself to bigger and better things in space right at a time when we were concerned that there might be a cutback in the space program. He said, I think the United States should undertake a very ambitious new project in space. And he said, I think we should not be ashamed to attempt something even though the scientific probability is in doubt. I think we should attempt interplanetary exploration in a manned sense, which we have had no commitment for up to this time. Whether this is a commitment of the Nixon administration or a personal hope of Vice President Agnew's, I don't know, but I should think such words would have been cleared before he flew to Cape Kennedy this morning. And it sounds as if the American space program is going to continue apace, that there will be the request from this administration for the $4 to $5 billion a year appropriations, which will be required to move on beyond the moon. But here we are talking of the flight beyond the moon, and we have yet to get to the moon. That is the mission of Apollo 11. The Apollo 11 mission is stated very simply by NASA for man to land on the moon and return safely. The second part of that mission is not considered prime, but it is hoped, of course, that he will bring back, first of all, samples of the moon surface, rocks, and so forth for a good look, so that man may get the first clue as to what the moon is really made of, some proof of his theories all along, and beyond that, to prove that man can operate in the moon environment, in that 1/6 gravity, that airless, windless, strange environment of the moon. Wally, the first important part of the mission is the launch. The launch comes now at 9:32 a.m.
Back to NBC News and the Today Show with Hugh Downs. And another announcement by Jack King, boys at Launch Control.
From Jack King. I guess we don't have that announcement.
This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control, T-minus 2 hours, 10 minutes, 35 seconds, and counting. At the 320-foot level, the fourth astronaut aboard the spacecraft regretfully leaves at this time. Astronaut Fred Hayes is about to come out after giving the 3 prime crewmen a hand in their preliminary checkouts aboard. Hayes will be coming out shortly. In the meantime, 120 feet below, where we had that problem with a leaky valve, the technicians have completed their work, and they are in the process now of departing from the launch pad. In a short while, we'll start flowing hydrogen again back through the general replenishing system to continue to top off the supply of the hydrogen fuel in the 3rd stage of the Saturn V launch vehicle. The spacecraft commander, Neil Armstrong, has completed a series of checks called the Board Advisory System checks. This is where certain key crewmen on the ground, members of the launch team, can send signals to the spacecraft commander in the spacecraft, light cues that would indicate difficulty during the flight in which he could take aboard action if he determined that such action was necessary. These checks have been completed, and Neil Armstrong confirmed that the lights came on in the console in front of him, the panel in front of him, as these lights were operated from the ground here in the Launch Control Center. All still going well with our count. We will stand by as we again bring hydrogen back to the 3rd stage. You will see how that operates. We're now at T-minus 2 hours, 9 minutes, 4 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control.
Frank Field in New York has some word for us on weather in space. I've been intrigued by hearing him explain that. It does exist, and he has a word on that now. Here's Frank Field.
Well, Hugh, I'm not sure whether you mean weather in space around Earth or weather out in space around the sun. We're going to be talking about both of them. I think first we ought to take a quick look at what's been happening around the Cape. It's cloudy just to the west of the Cape. There's a thunderstorm just about 40 miles out to the east out in the Atlantic. It's the same pattern we discussed earlier this morning. We have that line of clouds and showers that extends all the way down out of the Atlantic. It comes in right on shore, and then it goes right into the Gulf of Mexico. This has brought the cloudiness around the Cape area. At the moment, we have scattered clouds at about 2,000 feet, another layer at 15,000 feet. There's some very high thin cirrus way up there at about 20,000 feet that's broken. And the cloudiness, as you can see here to the west. As a matter of fact, we just received our radar depiction chart. This shows the areas of thunderstorms all tied in with that line that extends right across the Cape. And I've colored that in red. And here you can see, just off in the Atlantic, there's an extensive band of clouds and scattered showers and thunder showers all the way up and down the Atlantic coast, well offshore. There also happens to be a line of clouds and showers that extends from the western portion of the state clear across the Gulf of Mexico, and here you see that nice little opening in between that break. Now, we don't expect much to change. We'll have some variable cloudiness through the morning hours. There's no severe weather, no heavy showers or anything that might affect us, so we expect that at lunchtime, and space flight meteorologists, also the Cape Air Force, weathermen, expect the same thing, that there'll be some cloudiness, but that should not really interfere with the launch this morning. Hugh?
This is Apollo 7 Launch Control, T-minus 2 hours, 7 minutes and counting. At this time, we're just in the process of closing the hatch on the Apollo 11 spacecraft. Several of the closeout crew shook hands with the astronauts and then proceeded to close the hatch on direction from the spacecraft test conductor, Skip Chauvin. We had it logged as the hatch being closed and tightened, still being tightened right at this time, which is 25 minutes past the hour. Once the hatch is closed, we'll start a cabin purge to condition the cabin inside. The 3 astronauts, of course, are on pure oxygen in their spacesuits on the suit circuit. We will produce a cabin atmosphere in the spacecraft of a 60-40 combination, 60% oxygen and 40% nitrogen. This is the atmosphere used for liftoff. Once that is accomplished, the closeout crew will be ready to put the boost protective cover on the hatch and continue with their closeout. The hatch being closed at this time, we are proceeding. We'll stand by to see how our hydrogen condition is as far as replenishing the hydrogen fuel supply with the 3rd stage of the Saturn V. 2 hours, 5 minutes, 50 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control. And we appear to be proceeding satisfactorily at this time. The crew aboard the spacecraft at 320-foot level. The hatch is closed, and we're beginning to purge the cabin to bring it to the proper atmosphere full launch, which is a combination of oxygen and nitrogen, 60% oxygen and 40% nitrogen atmosphere. Of course, the astronauts themselves are breathing pure oxygen through their spacesuits. Coming up shortly will be another key test in which both the launch crew for the launch vehicle crew and the spacecraft team combine together with the commander, Neil Armstrong, to make a thorough check of the emergency detection system. This is the system that will signal the astronauts in the cabin if anything goes wrong below them. We use the ground-based computer to accomplish this test. It's rather lengthy as these tests go using a computer. It will take some 30 minutes. Neil Armstrong will be doing most of the work in the spacecraft, responding as different cue lights signifying different difficulties are presented to him. The abort panel, of course, is across from the commander on the left-hand side, the left front of the spacecraft. Our countdown continuing, T-minus 1 hour, 59 minutes, 34 seconds, and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control.
Back to CBS News and Walter Cronkite and Wally Schirra.
Man embarks today on history's greatest adventure. Here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, a massive, complex, and tragic vehicle waits to launch 3 American explorers into space, into the future, toward the lunar surface. The dawn of this day heralded the dawning of a new age, for with the first steps on the moon, man's strides across the universe really begin. It's a time of exhilaration, reflection, hope, fulfillment, as a centuries-old dream starts toward reality.
Coverage of Man on the Moon. The epic journey of Apollo 11, Walter Cronkite.
Good morning. It's T-minus 1 hour, 29 minutes, and 53 seconds, and counting in just an hour and a half. If all goes well, Apollo 11 astronauts, Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins, are to lift off from Pad 39A out there on the voyage man always has dreamed about. Next stop for them, the moon. The astronauts are on board now. They're strapped into their spacecraft atop the Saturn's third stage. They've been there for just about an hour. They're going through the final checkout of all the systems aboard the spacecraft to be sure they're really ready to go. At 9:32 a.m. Eastern Time, that huge 36-story high launch vehicle is scheduled to thunder to life, pushing the astronauts into temporary orbit around the Earth. 2.5 hours later, another rocket burn will send the spacecraft on its way to the moon. And then on a Sunday afternoon, the landing on the moon. And at 2:20 a.m. Monday, July 21st, a date which will live in history as long as man is on this planet and on the other planets. 38-year-old civilian Neil Alden Armstrong is to become the first human being to touch the moon. Aldrin will follow just 20 minutes later, and over the years to come, many others are going to walk on the desolate lunar surface. But Armstrong will take that first step in more ways than one, and many things will never be the same again. For in addition to the mission the 3 astronauts will perform and the experiments they'll undertake, the samples they'll bring back, these men will carry with them many other things. Many things that are not so nearly so easy to describe. There's the spirit of such men as Marco Polo and Columbus and Lindbergh, the dreams of Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, the vision of Kepler and Galileo, the skill of Shepard, Glenn, Schirra, Gagarin, Titov, and all the others. They'll carry thoughts of the moon goddess Diana and, I suppose, of green cheese. And boring through the vastness, the blackness, and the cold of space, they'll carry the pledge made 8 years ago by President Kennedy to put a man on the moon and bring him back safely in this decade. The description of this mission, the fundamental purpose of this mission, was put very simply by NASA, remembering those words. The prime purpose of the mission of Apollo 11, to put man on the moon and return him safely. During the planned Apollo 11 journey of just over 8 days, they're supposed to splash down a week from tomorrow in the Pacific, 1,250 miles southwest of Hawaii. What we'll talk about will be concerned with such things as mid-course corrections, SPS burns, and docking, rendezvous. The astronauts, of course, will be concerned with very much more. So it is now, before they go, as their gleaming vehicle sits poised and peaceful out there behind me on pad 39A. That there is time, if only briefly in this busy morning, to think of those three men and the burdens and the hopes that they carry on behalf of all mankind. It's going to be a journey, certainly, for the history books of all of those things that have entered the history books in our generation. This will live the longest. This, it is hoped, successful launch of Apollo 11 and the successful landing on the moon. Out here, there are thousands of newsmen from around the world to cover this launch and to witness this history in the making.
This is the VIP area, but it is divided into various sections, various gray
Frank Blair, CBS News.
VIP, VVIP, triple VIP, quadruple VIP, and so forth. I'm standing in the stands that will seat the diplomatic corps directly behind me, the stands reserved for Vice President Agnew and former President Johnson, who have not arrived yet. Beyond that, NASA officials, 5,000 guests in all, including some 400 congressmen and members of the Supreme Court, the presidential cabinet, 20 governors, 40 mayors, representatives of 60 nations will be here. Their flags are flying behind us.
Now to ABC News and Anchorman Frank Reynolds.
9:32 a.m. Eastern Daylight. A short while ago, in fact, the spacecraft
Jack King, voice of launch control.
Spacecraft Commander Neil Armstrong, that we were doing quite well. In fact, some 15 minutes ahead on some aspects of the preparation spacecraft-wise. Armstrong replied that was fine, just as long as we don't launch 15 minutes early, obviously referring to the start of the window. The countdown still going well, T-minus 55 minutes, 10 seconds and counting. This is Kennedy Launch Control.
So, all is going well. We'll be back with more on the flight of Apollo 11 right after station identification. Pilot and Mike Collins will be alone, as you know, during the lunar orbit while Armstrong and Aldrin are on the surface of the moon. Mike said the other day that he thought he would probably be able to go to sleep, although he admitted it seemed rather strange to think of going there. Ron, what do you suppose Mike Collins is doing right now as we are 52 minutes away from liftoff?
Well, as you know that Mike Collins is sitting over on the right-hand side of the command module, and he'll be monitoring all the systems during the launch. But Neil Armstrong is sitting over in the seat that I'm sitting in now, and there has been made some mention here by Mission Control of the emergency detection system. Well, now very shortly, about another 10 or 15 minutes, Neil Armstrong will be arming his emergency detection system, and he does this merely by putting this emergency detection system switch in the power on position. Then he has a couple circuit breakers, the sequential event circuit breakers, and the switch, and then the pyro arm circuit breakers and switches.
Well, Bob, what does the emergency detection system detect?
Well, what he's doing right now is just arming it, and all he has to do now to make an abort from the pad is just merely turn this handle in the counterclockwise direction, and he can make an abort right from the pad. And the entire sequence of operations is all entirely automatic down to a water landing. But as in every other system in the command module, there is redundancy, and he does have a series of about 8 buttons on the main panel that he can push to open up his decoy, his drogue chute, or his parachute. So he can just like a typewriter, just be pushing these buttons in the event the automatic system does fail.
And he'll get that signal, and he has to act fairly fast, doesn't he?
Yes, there is a bright red light on the main panel that says abort.
And then they go. Thank you very much, Bob. We'll be back to you many times during this flight. Also, we have a mock-up of the lunar module, which is built, of course, by the Grumman Aircraft Corporation, and we have Dick Sprague and Terry Snyder, both of Grumman, who are standing by there. Now, gentlemen, your big moment, of course, comes a few days from now. The LEM is all folded up right now, and nobody's inside. But, let's see, Dick, see if I can recognize you fellas with your elaborate gear on. Dick, where are you? You're standing in the Armstrong position, yes?
Right here, Frank.
And you're standing right in front of the window that he will look out actually for the last 500 feet or so as he comes down to make that visual sighting, right?
That's correct, Frank.
And Terry, you are standing where Buzz Aldrin will be standing. He will be calling out numbers and altitudes and various other information.
That's right. This is the LMP side of the cockpit.
Do you think it's very comfortable in there, gentlemen?
Well, it's standing in a 1G environment now, Frank, and it gets a little tiring here. Of course, in orbit, the crew will be in 0G, be sort of floating position rather than standing.
Okay, gentlemen, we'll be back to you many, many times between now and next Sunday and Monday morning. Let's go back now to Jules Bergman at the Cape.
And at T-minus 49 minutes and 2 seconds at the Cape, Frank and Dick, it's all going very smoothly here. Launch Control has relayed word that the EDS system testing, the emergency detection system testing that North American Rockwell engineering pilot Bob Ron was talking about, that EDS system testing is going well. Actually, the EDS system works by relaying word, if you will, electronic word, from sensors planted all over the launch vehicle, the Saturn V, and the service module and command module, sensors that tell the three astronauts just how well their spacecraft is doing and how well the launch vehicle is doing, and that give them the warnings Bob Ron spoke of, and warnings in time to abort, if they have to abort right off the pad using the solid rocket launch escape tower system to get away if anything should go wrong. We might add, of course, that there's no indication nothing will go wrong, nothing ever has gone wrong in any U.S. manned space flight in space or during the launch function. Nothing that would cause an abort off the pad. The closest we ever came was back in the Gemini 6 flight, but careful action there prevented an abort off the pad. If it did happen, the three pilots and their command module would be hoisted about 10,000 feet in the air by a 147,000-pound solid fuel escape rocket, and their parachutes would open some 10,000 feet out over the Atlantic, and they'd come down to a safe, smooth landing. But that, of course, is an ultimate backup, an ultimate fail-safe, if anything should go wrong. As of T-minus 47 minutes, all is going smoothly. ABC's coverage of the flight of Apollo 11 continues in just 1 minute right after this message.
Now back to NBC News and the Today Show. An interview of astronaut Neil Armstrong by Frank McGee of NBC News, taped earlier, is in progress.
They're very excited about it.
Yes, they are, at least to the degree that they're excited about any space flight. I think this one is beginning to take some special significance in their eyes.
How can you tell?
Well, my elder boy is continually in the business of making models of the spacecraft now and asking very detailed questions about the operation of the various components that he's putting in place. And as a matter of fact, I frankly have some difficulty in answering him sometimes.
We've just been told on our little line here to the launch control that at 45 minutes it's all still going just fine. We had a look a while ago at the VIP viewing stand, which is nearby here. It's enormous. There, as we said, there are 10,000 VIPs, including some MIPs, moderately important people. In the VIP stand, here's President Johnson, and I believe that's Hale Boggs, the Democratic leader of the House, there talking to him. And President Nixon invited Mr. Johnson to come down for the flight, sent an Air Force plane to get him. He accepted. It was here, came yesterday, had a little lunch. Mrs. Johnson also did for some of their friends here at Cocoa Beach. As we were saying a minute ago, it was his idea, Mr. Johnson's idea, to plan the landing on the moon. He was vice president at the time, chairman of what was called the Space Council, a job given him by President Kennedy. And Mr. Kennedy was looking around for some sort of space achievement that would put this country back in the lead in the exploration beyond the Earth, and he asked for ideas. They had a meeting at the White House, and it was Johnson who suggested that they plan, this was 1961,
plan to land a man on the moon, and there were many questions about it, the cost of it, the danger of it, and so on. But he persisted, pushed the idea, and finally that became policy, which President Kennedy enunciated in a speech to Congress in, I think, May of 1961. And today it is about to happen. Mark Landsman, NBC News correspondent, is in Wapakoneta, Ohio, outside Neil Armstrong's parents' house. Mark?
The lights came on at 5 o'clock this morning at the Wapakoneta, Ohio home of Stephen and Viola Armstrong, parents of astronaut Neil Armstrong. The couple, preferring to avoid the crowds at Cape Kennedy, decided to stay here at home and watch the launch of Apollo 11 on television. They will view it with a small family group, including the astronaut's 81-year-old grandmother and a cousin. The family minister is also inside the home. Stephen Armstrong, an official in the Ohio Department of Mental Hygiene and Correction, had first learned of his son's selection for the moon's mission from a co-worker who had heard it announced on a news broadcast. Neil had called home later that day. He has kept in close touch with his parents and talked to them last yesterday afternoon. He was happy his brother, sister, and their families had come to the Cape to see the launch and said they were having a good time.
And launch control, we're now less than 16 minutes away from the planned liftoff of the Apollo 11 space vehicle. All still going well with the countdown at this time. The astronauts aboard the spacecraft have had a little chance to rest over the last few minutes or so. At least they haven't been busy with procedures with the spacecraft test conductor. In the meantime, we have been performing final checks on the tracking beacons in the instrument unit, which is used as the guidance system during the powered phase of flight. Once we get down to the 3-minute and 10-second mark in the countdown, we'll go on an automatic sequence. As far as the launch vehicle is concerned, all aspects from there on down will be automatic, run by the ground master computer here in the firing room. This will lead up to the 8.9-minute mark in the countdown when the ignition sequence will begin in those 5 engines of the first stage, the S1C stage of the Saturn V. At the 2-second mark, we'll get information and a signal that all engines are running, and at the 0 mark in the countdown, once we get the commit signal, the signal that says that the thrust is proper and acceptable, we then will get a commit and liftoff as the hold-down arms release the vehicle. We have some 7.6 million pounds of thrust pushing the vehicle upward, a vehicle that weighs close to 6.5 million pounds. We're now 14 minutes, 30 seconds and counting, and this is Kennedy Launch Control.
Now, Apollo 11 sits out there on its pad, ready to go 14 minutes from now. Frank and David, have you ever thought that what that rocket represents actually is the means of controlling an explosion? That rocket holds approximately 1 million gallons of one of the most volatile fuels that mankind has ever assembled or put together. You might say it's 1 million gallons of liquid gunpowder. The idea, though, is to not let it explode all at once, but to draw out the explosion over a period of time. The only analogy that I find myself falling back on is if you lined up a string of automobiles from San Francisco to New York, bumper to bumper, put them all in low gear, and at full throttle, you still wouldn't generate as much power as this Apollo 11 will generate approximately 13 minutes from now as it lifts off the pad.
And now the voice of Jack King. Apollo launch control. As the countdown continues, T-minus 1 minute and counting.
50 seconds and counting. We're past T-minus 60. 55 seconds and counting. Neil Armstrong just reported back. It's been a real smooth countdown. We're past the 50-second mark. Power transfer is complete. We're on internal power with the launch vehicle at this time. 40 seconds away from the Apollo 11 liftoff. All the second stage tanks now pressurized. 35 seconds and counting. We are still go with Apollo 11. 30 seconds and counting. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 25 seconds. 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower cleared.
We got a roll program. Neil Armstrong reporting the roll and pitch program, which puts Apollo 11 on a proper heading. Plus 30 seconds. Roll complete and pitch program. Altitude's 2 miles. Oh, Houston, you're good at 1 minute. Downrange 1 mile, altitude 4 miles now. Velocity 2,195 feet per second. We're through the region of maximum dynamic pressure now. So 8 miles downrange, 12 miles high. Velocity 4,000 feet per second. Stand by for mode 1 Charlie. Mark, mode 1 Charlie. 1 Charlie. Cliff Charlesworth taking a staging status. This is Houston, you are go for staging. Inboard cutoff. Inboard engines out. I'm inboard cutoff. Downrange 35 miles, 30 miles high. Standing by for the outboard engine cut down now. There it is, right on the tip. And ignition. Well, in Houston, thrust is go. All engines, you're looking good. Roger, you're loud and clear, Houston. At 3 minutes, downrange 70 miles, 43 miles high, velocity 9,300 feet per second. We got skirt step. Roger, we confirm skirt step. Tower's gone. Roger, tower. Neil Armstrong confirming both the engine skirt separation and the launch escape tower separation. Houston, be advised the visual is go today. This is Houston, roger that. Yeah, they finally gave me a window to look out. Houston, your guidance is converged. You're looking good. Downrange 140 miles, altitude 62 miles, velocity 10,300 feet per second. 11 Houston, you are a go at 4 minutes. Roger. Apollo 11 right on the ground track. Miles downrange now, 72 miles high, velocity 11,000 feet per second.
tracking it for quite a long period of time here with the Air Force cameras, about 80 miles in altitude now and more than 200 miles downrange. And still got a...
Booster says it's looking good at 5 minutes.
Then Houston, you are go at 5 minutes.
Roger, you're Apollo 11, go. Downrange 270 miles, altitude 82 miles, velocity 12,472 feet per second.
Slide S4B to COI capability.
Okay.
Mark, S4B to COI capability.
Roger.
We're losing sight of the spacecraft, so we'll go to our animation. I'll get all of the sequence.
Using the S4B if necessary.
You're in your living room. Ah, thank you. You all are coming through beautifully, too.
It is the second stage of the Saturn that is still firing and will continue to fire for about another 4 minutes now.
Everyone's reporting go here in the control center.
So at 6 minutes, starting to get motors. Roger 11, your go from the ground at 6 minutes. Apollo 11, this is Houston, level sense arm at 8+17, outboard cutoff at 9+11.
When you see it in the early stages of the liftoff and realize that
The level sense arm is the sequence that arranges the staging between the second stage and the third stage. The fuel uncovers a sensor starting that sequence.
I have realized that the rocket is 360
Predicting
feet
that
high.
will be uncovered at 8 minutes 17 seconds with outboard engine cutoff 9 minutes 11 seconds on the second stage.
Apollo 11, go at 7 minutes. 11, this is Houston. Roger, your go from the ground at 7 minutes. Level sense arm at 8+17, outboard cutoff at 9+11.
Roger. Downrange 530 miles, altitude 95 miles, velocity 17,358 feet per second.
They're within about 5 miles and as high as they want to get on the launch. But I was trying to say that the flame shooting out of the rocket is 2, perhaps 3 times as long as the rocket itself, which is 300.
Apollo 11 is still right down the ground track, still
Oh,
go.
the flame is.
At 7 minutes 41 seconds.
Roger, we confirm.
Inboard engines are out on the second stage as planned. Apollo 11, go on all sources.
Houston, your go at 8 minutes.
I've just built the mixture ratio shift.
Roger, we got PU shift down here too.
United States for it, these thunderstorms downrange is about all.
This is Houston, you are go for staging, over.
Understand, go for staging.
Stand by for mode 4 capability.
Do mode 4.
Mark, mode 4 capability.
Mode 4 and Apollo 11 could get into orbit using the service propulsion system now. Altitude is 100 miles, downrange 883 miles. Outboard engine cutoff.
And ignition.
Again, right on time.
Ignition confirmed, thrust is go, 11.
And now the
Third stage now.
It stays with them for some time yet.
Velocity 23,128 feet per second. Downrange 1,000 miles, altitude 101 miles.
Apollo 11, this is Houston. At 10 minutes, you are go.
Roger, 11, go. Capcom Bruce McCandless giving the reports here from the control center.
Apollo 11, this is Houston. Predicted cutoff at 11 plus 42. Over.
1142, Rich.
It'll be 11 minutes and 42 seconds into the flight from the third stage.
Downrange 1,175 miles. Velocity 24,190 feet per second. Altitude 102 nautical miles. Apollo 11 still go on all sources.
Apollo 11, this is Houston. You are go at 11.
We're predicting third stage shutdown at 11 minutes 42 seconds. Velocity 25,254 feet per second. Downrange 1,400 miles now. Altitude 102.8 nautical miles. Down. Shut down right on time.
1.4 by 103.6. Roger, shut down, and we copy 101.4 by 103.6. Apollo 11, this is Houston. You are confirmed to go for orbit.
No, we in fact are in orbit. And this is mission control to Houston.
This is Houston. The booster is safe.
Roger. Show velocity at insertion 25,568 feet per second.
You can see on our map at the NBCU Space Center about where they are located, the flashing lights out over the Atlantic Ocean. They are in orbit, almost exactly what they had in mind. They wanted a circular orbit of about 101 nautical miles. The orbit is 101.4 by 103.6. And they got the speed they wanted, 25,568 feet per second. About 17,500 miles an hour. All of it routine so far, routine appearing, yet we all realize that this is the beginning of the most audacious undertaking that man has ever attempted. We'll be back in just a moment. Now here is a word from Gulf.